Yeah. The sense of the Prophet ﷺ being a worshipper of Allah. And a worshipper of Allah, an abd, a slave of Allah who submits to Allah, who worships Allah, this is something which is praiseworthy, it's a good thing. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said from the greatest names a person can be given are Abdullah and Abdul Rahman. And so in fact, him being called a slave in this ayah, referring to him going on this journey, is actually a praise of the Prophet ﷺ. Being called a slave of Allah, bi'abdihi, with his slave, the slave of Allah going on this journey, is actually a praise of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. So Isra refers to the night journey from Mecca to Al-Aqsa or Jerusalem. And then Mi'raj refers to going up. And this is of course referring to the Mi'raj, the ascension up into the heavens. From Masjid al-Aqsa up into the heavens when he met the prophets and messengers and he saw the punishments and the rewards of hellfire and paradise. And the scholars also speak about when this specific incident occurred. And there's no authentic narrations or narrations or anything that's authentic from the time of the Prophet ﷺ that shows us when exactly this occurred, meaning like a specific day of the month or a specific month. There's no, although there are certain groups and certain people who may say that this specific incident took place on a specific month, it's not based on anything which is authentic. With regards to roughly when it occurred, in terms of which year it may have occurred, then the scholars, they say for sure this incident occurred before the prayers were obligated upon the Muslims. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ was not obligated the 5 daily prayers until he went on the night journey. As we know, the salawat were given to the Prophet ﷺ on this journey. And also, narrations say Khadija radiallahu anha was not alive when the obligatory prayers were made obligatory upon the Muslims. So it's after the death of Khadija radiallahu anha, after Am al-Huzn, and before, of course, the prayers were made an obligation, and before, of course, the Hijrah. So it seems like it was maybe a year or so, give or take, maybe less, maybe a bit more, after the death of his wife Khadija radiallahu anha, after Am al-Huzn. So it's literally like towards the end of the life of the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca, prior to him making the Hijrah. And interestingly, the companions never mentioned which day this occurred, which night this occurred, which month this occurred, which year it occurred, which is interesting, because you would expect them to mention the day it occurred, or the month it occurred, or the year it occurred. The fact that they don't mention when it occurred, what does it show us?
Not important.
It's not important. It shows us it's not necessary. It's not something which is necessary. It's not important. It's not something that we have to know. It doesn't add anything with regards to our ibadah, with regards to our iman, with regards to our knowledge of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, especially things which are of benefit. It's not going to be of any benefit knowing, because even if we do know, to be honest, what would happen is people would start using that occasion as an innovation and start doing certain things, rituals and ibadah on that day, claiming that it's the day when there was a night journey, which again is against the sunnah also. And so the point being here, there is a wisdom behind why we don't know the specific date. Also, what's the wisdom behind this journey in the first place? Why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taking the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam on this amazing journey? Of course, Allah does whatever He wishes, but some of the scholars, they mention some wisdoms. From the wisdoms of why He went on this amazing journey is because of the timing of what's happening during His life and the difficulty that He's just been going through. We've already mentioned before, Ta'if. We've mentioned the boycott. We've mentioned Am al-Huzn, the death of Khadija radiallahu anha, the death of his uncle Abu Talib, the persecution of the companions, them making the hijrah to Abyssinia, the persecution of the Prophet ﷺ, death threats against him, physical harm against him. So you can just imagine the stress and the pressure on the head of the Prophet ﷺ, the whole year in which he was somebody, as the companions say, wasn't even smiling, wouldn't even show a smile as a result of the deaths of his beloved. And so, from the reasons why is to encourage the Prophet ﷺ, increase his optimism, give him some hope with regards to the da'wah, with regards to the reward, with regards to the future, and how, in fact, all the prophets and messengers were tested at some point or another in their life. So from the wisdoms we can gather with regards to why this incident occurred is because it's meant to encourage the Prophet ﷺ, give him a boost and make him motivated with regards to the da'wah in Mecca and also after the hijrah.
One night as the Prophet ﷺ lay sleeping in the same spot where Abdul Muttalib used to sleep, next to the Kaaba, he was woken by the Archangel Jibreel.
And some narrations mention the Prophet ﷺ wasn't by the Kaaba, that he was in his home. And that he left his home and he was taken by Jibreel alayhi from Mecca to Masjid al-Aqsa. Prior to this, prior him to actually going to Masjid al-Aqsa, Jibreel alayhi does something which he has already done to the Prophet ﷺ, but many years ago when he was a child. And that's shaq al-sadr, the opening of the chest. And so Jibreel alayhi opens the chest of the Prophet ﷺ, takes out his heart, washes his heart with Zamzam, and then places it back in his heart, in his chest. And then seals the chest, and then they make their way on this journey. Notice that one difference between this washing of the heart and the opening of the chest when he was a child is there is no clot of blood, which is the piece of shaitan from the human being, which is being taken out at this moment in time, because it was already done when he was young. And so in this incident, the heart is taken out, it's washed, placed back, and then they go on this journey. One may ask what is the wisdom behind why his heart was washed? If it's already washed when he was a child, and his heart was already purified, and the piece of shaitan was taken out of him, what's the wisdom behind taking it out at this point in time?
It's to strengthen his heart for what is about to occur.
To strengthen his heart for what's about to occur.
He gets went through Amal Hazm.
Okay, Amal Huzn.
To be strong.
Strong. So it's a sense of purification. His heart is being purified and cleaned. Where is he going to go?
Allah.
Into Allah, into the heavens. So it requires, the scholars say, an extra type of purification. And so there's the outward purification. The Prophet ﷺ was always in a state of wudu. He was always in a state of wudu. He's prepared, he's performed wudu. He's always in that state. But in this incident now, his inside is also going to be purified. His heart is also going to be washed, it's going to be purified, because this journey is unlike any other journey. He's going to now be going into the heavens and eventually meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also.
Later the Prophet ﷺ described what happened. I sat up and he took hold of my arm. I stood beside him and he brought me to the door of the mosque, where there was a white animal for me to ride.
And there are descriptions of this animal. Narrations mention this animal was white in color, and it was between a donkey and a mule in terms of its size. A mule is slightly smaller than a donkey, I think. And so it's around that size. And also, they said that this animal was called buraq. And the word buraq comes from the word barq, which means lightning, which shows the immense speed of this animal. And some narrations say that one stride of this animal, one stride of this animal was basically as far as the eye can see of a human being. So one step would be as far as the human eye could see. That's one step of this animal. So it's unlike any animal that we've seen. And narrations which mention that this animal had wings don't have any authenticity. We don't know, there are no authentic narrations which mention that this animal had wings. But what we do know is that it was called buraq, it was white in color, and interestingly, when the Prophet ﷺ was about to ride this animal, Jibreel alayhi was holding the reins, and the animal was like frightened. It kind of jerked a little bit, like horses do. You know, horses, animals, donkeys, when they're afraid or when they're a bit nervous, they might jump and they might move around a little bit. And so Jibreel alayhi said to the animal, said to Buraq, "Be steady, O Buraq, because there is no one who is better than the one who is about to mount you right now. This man is going to be the best person who is going to mount you and ride on you." Which is interesting, because it shows us a few things. First of all, interestingly, it shows us that in the world of the unseen, in the world of the angels, angels have animals which they ride. which isn't something maybe we would have thought about. Angels actually have these riding animals, these riding beasts. Buraq is not an animal from this world, it's from the unseen, which means in the land of the unseen, the world of the unseen, these angels, they also have these animals that they ride. Also, based on this hadith of what Jibreel said to the animal, it seems like this animal was also used previously with other people, maybe with other prophets and messengers who rode this animal in the past. And so, Jibreel then ascends on this animal along with the Prophet ﷺ.
The Prophet ﷺ told of how he mounted the animal and with the Archangel Jibreel at his side was transported from Mecca to the mosque called Al-Aqsa in faraway Jerusalem.
And nowadays, if one was to travel from Mecca to Jerusalem, I believe it's maybe 3 hours. Anybody made that journey before? Around 3 hours, I would say, maybe 3 or 4 hours, not more than that, minimum 2 hours. And this is by plane. And if one was to travel by animal, by camel or by horse in those days, at minimum, maybe it would take like 2 days. If you were going on a fast animal like a horse, it would take maybe 2 days or 3 days to travel. And if you're on a camel and if you're going slower, it could take a week, it could take maybe 2 weeks. If you're going very fast, maybe 2 days. And so the Prophet ﷺ is making this amazing journey at night, and it's only a portion of the night. Because narrations mention that when the Prophet ﷺ came back, and he went back to his bed was still warm. Where he was sleeping, it was still warm. You know when you get up, for example, to do something, you forget to do something, you grab your phone or something, and then after a few seconds or 10, 20 seconds, you go back to your bed, it's still warm. There's a period of time when the body heat hasn't left wherever you were lying down. It was that short of a moment in the eyes of the Prophet ﷺ in this world. But of course, the actual experience itself, of course, Allah can do whatever He wishes. The whole experience was much longer for the Prophet ﷺ. But in the worldly sense, it was a very short amount of time. And so they make their way to Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem. And when they arrive, the Prophet ﷺ said that we tied the animal to a post that was used by prophets in the past. So there was a specific post, a specific place that was used where the previous prophets would also tie the animal at that point, at that specific post by Masjid al-Aqsa. And I've heard that some of the scholars from Palestine who are there, may Allah protect them and protect them from the harms and from the attacks, I've heard that they're aware of the actual post upon which the prophets and messengers would tie the animals when they would go there, especially the Messenger of Allah and where he specifically went. Allah knows best if that's the actual place, but it said that that's something which those who have khibra and those who have experience and knowledge of the area, it seems like they're aware of those things. Allah knows best.
There the Prophet ﷺ found Ibrahim, Musa and Isa among a group of prophets. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ acted as their leader or imam in prayer.
So the Prophet ﷺ goes into the Masjid al-Aqsa, and lo and behold, the previous prophets and messengers are there. Now, an issue arises here, is are these prophets and messengers alive? So how are they there then? Huh? So what's going on here? What's happening? How are they there? Are they actually there? Did they actually pray behind the Prophet ﷺ? Yes, in the hadith they did. So if they already passed away, how can they be there? Some of the scholars, they say it was their arwah, their souls which were there. And so they prayed behind the Prophet ﷺ. Other scholars, they say, based on some narrations which mention the description of those prophets. For example, Musa ﷺ was described as somebody who was muscular. He was a muscular person. Isa ﷺ was someone who was described as tanned, and he had long hair. So it seems like Allah knows best, based on what some scholars say, is that for that period of time, the prophets were given life just for that specific moment. Just for that specific moment. Allah knows best. But either way, the Prophet ﷺ arrives inside the masjid, and lo and behold, he sees the prophets of Allah, the messengers of Allah, Ibrahim alayhi Musa alayhi Isa alayhi, and they're all there. And then Jibreel alayhi says to him, lead the salah. Now this is an honor for the Prophet ﷺ. You can only imagine. Imagine you're in a masjid and there are scholars in the masjid, maybe there's a big conference or something, and there's scholars and du'at who've come in the masjid and they're involved, and out of everybody they say, we want you to lead the salah. It's a sign of respect, it's a sign of honor. Especially in those days, in the early days of Islam, the leader of the Muslims will always be the imam in the main masjid in the Muslim world. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Umar radiallahu anhu, the Khulafa Rashidun, and even those who came after, the leaders of the Muslims were always the ones who would lead the prayer in the main masjid in Medina or wherever the capital of the Islamic Empire was. So the point being here, this was a huge respect shown to the Prophet ﷺ. And it's an example. What does it show us? It's a sign of respect. It's also something else. It's showing us he's Khatamul Anbiya. He is the seal of prophets. He is the final prophet. And also he is the best of prophets. Because the best from amongst you is the one who leads the salah. He's always the best person. And so the Prophet ﷺ is told to lead the salah. And you can just imagine, psychologically, emotionally, how it would make the Prophet ﷺ feel. To be able to lead the salah behind all these past prophets and messengers who are now praying behind him. It's something which, subhanAllah, one can only imagine. And so the Prophet ﷺ acts as their leader, as their imam, and he leads them in salah. And by the way, this also shows us the significance of being an imam, the importance and the status of the imam. The imam is the one that we look up to, the one that we respect. And in salah, he is the one that we follow. إِنَّمَا جُعِلَ الْإِمَامُ لِيُؤْتَمَ بِهِ. The Prophet ﷺ said, the imam is only there for you to follow. Meaning the whole purpose of the imam is that you follow the imam. And that's why the scholars, they say, you're not supposed to, it's not permissible to precede the imam. Like if you see the imam going to sajda and you jump down into sajda before the imam is going to sajda, it's actually not permissible. The Ahnaf, and I believe the Hanabila, they actually say if a person goes down into sajda or into a position before the imam is going to that position, his salah is invalid. Because he's preceded the imam. What's the point of the imam then? What's the point of him doing the salah if you're going to go before him? And in fact, in school, when I sometimes did the salah or I'm teaching, sometimes I see the kids jumping down into sajda, like before me. Having done takbir, they jump down into sajda and they bang their heads on the floor and they're going down really fast. And I have to keep on reminding them. But sometimes kids, I don't know, it's like a race or something, or they want to show how steadfast they are in their salah and how good they are in their salah, they want to go before you. And so it's something we have to keep reminding them. But it's a fiqh point that we need to remember. Why? Because the imam is there for you to follow. He's the one that goes first. He's in front of you in every aspect. Physically he's in front of you, but also when it comes to the positions of the salah. Yeah.
Then he was brought 2 jugs, one containing wine and the other milk. He chose the milk and refused the wine.
So now he's brought 2 vessels. And in one vessel there's milk, in the other vessel there's wine. And he's being told to choose. He's being told to choose one of the 2 jugs, one containing milk and one containing wine. Yeah.
At this, the Archangel Jibreel said, You have been rightfully guided to the fitrah, the true nature of a man, and so will your people be, Muhammad. Wine is forbidden to you.
And so when he was presented with the milk and with the wine, which one did he choose?
Milk.
He chose the milk. And the scholars, they speak about the differences between milk and wine. And why milk was chosen by the Prophet ﷺ. Which is better?
Milk.
Milk. Is wine haram at this moment in time? Majority of scholars say wine wasn't haram at this point in time in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. But the Prophet ﷺ had never drunk alcohol. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu also had never drunk alcohol in their lives. So what makes milk better? And why is wine worse? One could say wine is from grapes. It's natural. Milk is from animals. From the udders of animals, wine is natural, it's from grapes, from apples or dates or whatever the case may be. Now,
The beer make you drunk.
okay, good. So one thing you can say about wine is that a person becomes intoxicated. It's an intoxicating substance. يخمر العقل. It clouds the mind, it clouds one's judgment, doesn't know what he's doing, doesn't know what he's saying. You can't get drunk on milk. Maybe babies when they're drinking milk possibly, but otherwise a person doesn't get drunk by drinking milk. What else?
Milk is also food.
Milk is?
It's also food as well. Food
So
and
it's, okay, so it's like nutritious in that sense, okay?
Milk contains calcium.
Okay, milk contains calcium. Wine contains fruit. Grapes.
The
Or
grape,
dates.
you have to change it to become khamr.
Okay, the substance that you use for wine, it has to change. What happens to it? It, it rots, it corrupts. It's not the same anymore. Have you ever seen those adverts or something that talk about wine and it says this bottle of red wine 1887 and they have the dates. That's the date the wine was made. That's the date the wine was made. Meaning the older the wine, the better the wine. For non-Muslims, the older the wine, the better. Why? Because it's the fermentation process. The dates or the grapes or the apples they're using, essentially what they do, I don't know the whole process, but they put the fruit in some water, they leave it out under the sun, for example, and then it will slowly start to ferment and rot away, leaving a strong taste and odor in the water. It's essentially rotting away. And so this is how wine is made, this is how alcohol is produced. And so it's a liquid, it's a drink which is made as a result of fermenting and corrupting the fruit. Milk, on the other hand, is a pure substance. In fact, it's the opposite with milk. If you leave milk for a few days out in the open, you can't drink it anymore. You'll get sick. You can't leave milk for 10 years or from milk from 1887 and decide, oh, this is the good stuff. This is the good milk. It doesn't work. With alcohol, it might work, but with fresh milk, it's something you have to drink, straight away or in a day or two. Otherwise, as we know, it goes off. And so this is why milk is something which is superior to wine. And the Prophet ﷺ, of course, chose that which is better because he's the messenger of Allah. And so Jibreel ﷺ said to him, you've chosen the fitrah, the natural way, something which is better for you and for your believers and for your followers. Yeah.
The Prophet ﷺ also related how they passed through the heaven's gates and saw countless angels. Among them was Malik, the keeper of hell who never smiles.
Among them, the people or the angels that he saw was Malik. And Malik is the keeper of hell. And you can imagine when he's meeting the angels, when he meets Malik, he makes a point of saying Malik never smiled. So what does that show us about the other angels?
No rahmah.
They smile.
But about the other angels, they must have
Smile.
They must have smiled. And again, smiling is something which shows a person's beauty. And the angels are known for their beauty. The fact that he would mention that Malik never smiled must be because the previous angels must have been happy and smiled when they saw the Prophet ﷺ. And so when he saw Malik, Malik didn't smile. To the extent where he asked Jibreel ﷺ, why didn't he smile? Like it's unusual, strange, maybe you go somewhere and you're visiting everybody and everyone knows you or knows who you are and they shake your hand, they meet you and one person's not even smiling, just looking at you and shaking your hand as if he's not even happy to see you. Stands out from the crowd. And so all the angels are smiling and you can imagine the number of angels who are meeting the Prophet ﷺ. Malik comes, he doesn't smile. And so the Prophet ﷺ asked Jibreel ﷺ, why didn't he smile? And so Jibreel ﷺ, he says, from the moment hellfire was created, Malik hasn't smiled since. Because he's the keeper of hell. And also because you can imagine the torment and the destruction and the punishments of the hellfire. It wouldn't make sense for him to be smiling when he's in hellfire or he's the keeper of hellfire. And so Jibreel ﷺ, he said, since hellfire was created, he has not smiled. And if he was to smile for anyone, he would have smiled for you, O Muhammad ﷺ, as consolation to the Prophet ﷺ. Yeah.
Malik stepped forward and showed the Prophet ﷺ a view of hell and the terrible plight of those who suffer in that place. Then the Prophet ﷺ was taken up by the angels through the 7 heavens one by one.
So the Prophet ﷺ, many of the descriptions which he gives about hellfire and the descriptions which he gives about paradise are based on this night journey. because he went into the Mi'raj, or the Mi'raj specifically, the ascension into the heavens, where he saw the hellfire, he saw paradise, he saw the punishments. And of course, many things are mentioned. I'm sure we've all been made aware, we've read or we've heard about the punishments of hellfire, the rewards of those in paradise. But it seems like these were given to the Prophet ﷺ, or he was shown these things when he was on this journey, when he was on the Mi'raj up into the heavens. And the Prophet ﷺ is now being taken up through the heavens. He's being taken up through the heavens, and one by one he starts to meet prophets and messengers of Allah as he's going through the heavens. And it's interesting, the messengers and prophets he meets and where he meets them. Because first of all, the prophets and messengers that he does meet, wherever he meets them, it's not a sign of their superiority. So just because he meets one prophet at a lower heaven and another at a higher heaven, it doesn't mean that prophet is better than the other. Because on the day of judgment, when people enter Jannah, where are the prophets and messengers going to be? They're going to be the highest stations of Jannah. They're going to be in the highest planes, highest levels of Jannah, because of course they're the most righteous people. And so the Prophet ﷺ, when he goes through the heavens, he meets and he interacts with different prophets and messengers. When he arrives in the first heaven, he said, I saw Adam alayhi salam there. So in the first heaven, he saw Adam alayhi salam. And Jibreel alayhi salam said to him, this is your father Adam, pay him your greetings, give him salam. So he said, I gave him salam, and he responded with the salam back, and then he said to me, you are welcome, O pious son, O pious prophet. And so he spoke to Adam alayhi salam. Another narration mentions he was huge. Adam alayhi salam was very big. And he meets Adam alayhi salam in the first heaven. Then he makes his way to the second heaven. And he said, when I went to the second heaven, I saw Yahya and Isa alayhi salam. Why both of them together? Because they're related, they're cousins. Because Isa alayhi salam is the nephew of Zakaria alayhi salam. And Zakaria alayhi salam is the father of Yahya alayhi salam. So he saw both of them in the second heaven. Now, that's quite a jump between the first man who was ever created and Isa alayhi salam, who's basically all the way to one of the last prophets and messengers to come. And so the question might be, why was Isa alayhi salam in the second heaven? Why was he not in the fifth or sixth heaven? So we can see this isn't in chronological order of when they actually were sent down as prophets and messengers. So why was Isa and Yahya alayhi salam, why were they in the second heaven? The scholars, they say, Adam alayhi salam, first of all, in the first heaven makes sense. Why? Because he's the first man, the father of all mankind. And so the Prophet ﷺ meets him in the first heaven. The scholars, they say that Isa alayhi salam was introduced to the Prophet ﷺ in the second heaven because Isa alayhi salam is the last prophet to come just before the Prophet ﷺ. And so he's the last one to come. Because he's the last one to come, he's closest to the Prophet ﷺ in terms of chronologically, in terms of time span. He's the one who came just prior to the Prophet ﷺ. And so he meets the Prophet ﷺ in the second heaven. Yeah.
Along the way, he again saw Isa, Musa, and Ibrahim, and the Prophet ﷺ said that he never seen a man more like himself than Ibrahim.
So in terms of appearance, he looked more like the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Ibrahim alayhi salam, or the Prophet ﷺ looked more like Ibrahim alayhi salam than the other prophets and messengers. And when he went into the third heaven, so we'll talk about Ibrahim alayhi salam shortly, when he went into the third heaven, there he saw Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. And Jibreel alayhi salam said to him, this is Yusuf, pay him your greetings, give him salam. So he said, I greeted him, and again he said, you are most welcome, O pious brother, O pious prophet. He didn't say, O pious son, because of course that's Adam alayhi salam. The others, they would give salam, and they would say a similar thing. And so he meets Yusuf alayhi salam in the third heaven. Again, what's the wisdom behind Yusuf alayhi salam? The scholars, they say, the trial that the Prophet ﷺ went through, or even is going through, is the same as the trial of Yusuf alayhi salam. How so? Because Yusuf alayhi salam was betrayed by his own family members. Who from the family of the Prophet ﷺ also betrayed him? Who from Quraysh? Who from Banu Hashim? Abu Lahab. And obviously other family members who weren't supportive of the Prophet ﷺ. But Abu Lahab is the main person. So he was somebody who also betrayed the Prophet ﷺ. But just like Yusuf alayhi salam was given success and victory by the end of his life, by the end of the story of Yusuf in the Quran, by the end of that trial, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him that relief and gave him success at the end. Likewise, the Prophet ﷺ is also going to be given that success. But again, the similarity is there in terms of being tested by your loved ones. Your own flesh and blood are going to be the ones who are going to betray you. But success is in the hands of the believers. And so there's this hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving through meeting these different prophets and messengers for different reasons. And then he goes up into the fourth heaven and he meets Idris alayhi salam. And Idris alayhi salam is an interesting one because of course the same thing happens. He gives salam to Idris alayhi salam and he responds and he gives salam and he says, "Welcome, O pious brother, O pious prophet." Idris alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, he says, وَرَفَعْنَاهُ مَكَانًا عَلِيًّا, that we raised him a high station. We gave him a high station. And I said that this is one of the reasons why he was meeting the Prophet ﷺ in the heavens. Another narration, we don't know its authenticity, but it mentions that an angel was taking Idris ﷺ into the heavens, showing him the heavens. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down the angel of death to take the soul of Idris ﷺ. And he told him to take the soul in the heavens while he's ascending. And the angel of death was thinking, how am I going to take his soul while he's in the heavens? And as he's coming down, Idris ﷺ was coming up. And then he took his soul, it said, Allah knows best, he took his soul in the heaven because he was ascending with an angel. And so we know for sure that in the Quran Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions his status. وَرَفَعْنَاهُ مَكَانًا عَلِيًّا, we raised him a high position. And some say it's due to his soul being taken in the heavens. Either way, he's mentioned in the Quran as somebody who has high status. And then in the fifth heaven, he meets Harun alayhi salam. And in the sixth heaven, he meets Prophet Musa alayhi salam. And of course, Prophet Musa alayhi salam has many similarities with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam because Musa alayhi salam's story, Musa alayhi salam's name is mentioned the most in the Quran. Some of the scholars they said the Quran was almost the whole story of Musa alayhi salam. The Quran almost became the whole Quran almost became the story of Musa alayhi salam because it's mentioned so much. In many different chapters, the story of Musa, either in totality or parts of the story are mentioned in different surahs. And so Musa alayhi salam meets him, he greets Musa alayhi salam, and the Prophet ﷺ, he said, when I left Musa alayhi salam, as we were leaving, Musa alayhi salam started to cry. And then he was asked, what makes you weep? Why are you crying? And Musa alayhi salam, he said, I weep because after me there has been sent a prophet, meaning the Prophet ﷺ, a young man, ghulam, he calls him a ghulam, a young man whose followers will enter paradise in greater numbers than my followers. So he's not angry, but of course, he's thinking about his followers and he's thinking about, the followers of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and how they'll be huge in number. And so the Prophet ﷺ, interestingly, he's called a ghulam. How old is the Prophet ﷺ at this point in time? Around 52 years old. 51, 52 years old. So he's not a ghulam. He's not a boy. But he's being called a young man by Musa alayhi salam. Because Musa alayhi salam, some narrations mention he lived until he was over 100 years old. So compared to Musa alayhi salam, somebody in his 50s is like, very, very young. So he says, I am sad because he will have more followers than me on the day of judgment. And of course, Musa alayhi salam was also tested by his people. He was also somebody who had to leave his land. He was also somebody who had to go back and call them to the worship of Allah. Interestingly, Yusuf alayhi salam, something we didn't mention. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quotes Yusuf alayhi salam later on in his life when he conquers Mecca and he returns back to Mecca, and the people are waiting to see what judgment is going to be given to them because of the persecution they inflicted upon the Muslims. And the Prophet ﷺ, he says to them, لا تثريب عليكم اليوم, there is no punishment upon you today. يغفر الله لكم وهو أرحم الراحمين. He has forgiven you and he is the most merciful of those who show mercy. And these are the statements of Yusuf alayhi salam from Surah Yusuf. So again, all these points are points which eventually come back in the lifetime of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And then he makes his way into the seventh heaven. And there he says, I saw Ibrahim alayhi salam. And as we mentioned, there was no one who was more similar to the Prophet ﷺ in terms of his appearance than Ibrahim alayhi salam. Some narrations mention that Ibrahim alayhi salam was leaning against Baytul Ma'mur. And Baytul Ma'mur is the Kaaba of paradise. It's directly above the Kaaba, but it's in the heavens. It's in Jannah. And this is the house of Allah in the heavens. And it's interesting, Ibrahim alayhi salam was reclining, leaning his back against Baytul Ma'mur. There's lots of symbolism there. Why Ibrahim alayhi salam? And why Baytul Ma'mur? Why is he leaning against it? Ibrahim alayhi salam was the one who rebuilt the Kaaba. And he is the one who built the Kaaba on earth. And this is the Kaaba in the heavens. And why is he reclining? Leaning against it. Almost like as if he did his job, he did his duty on earth, rebuilding the Kaaba. Now he's relaxing in the heavens. And by the way, these again, the scholars mention, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the Prophet's life again, or it could be the souls that the Prophet ﷺ is interacting with in the heavens. So Ibrahim alayhi salam is relaxing. Other narrations mention the children of the believers are with Ibrahim alayhi salam in that station, playing in that area, in that place. Those whose children pass away at a young age, children who die of the believers, they're there also with Ibrahim alayhi salam. And so he also meets Ibrahim alayhi salam. And Ibrahim alayhi salam also calls him son. Adam alayhi salam called him a son. Ibrahim alayhi salam also says, welcome, O pious son. So he also calls him a son because he's from the descendants of Ibrahim alayhi salam.
He also saw John called Yahya in Arabic, Yusuf, Idris, and Harun. At last he reached the tree of uttermost, the Sidrat al-Muntaha, where no prophet has been before.
So this is a tree which is described by the Prophet ﷺ. It's a special tree from the trees of paradise. It's one of the greatest trees, or the greatest tree of paradise. And it's basically at the uppermost station prior to him going to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. And it said that even Jibreel alayhi salam wouldn't go past the dog tree, Sidratul Muntaha. And the Prophet ﷺ, he described the fruits, and he said the fruits of this tree are huge like jugs, and he mentioned jugs from a specific place. And he also described the leaves of this tree being as big as the ears of elephants. So it's a very distinct tree. And he also speaks about the description of Jannah. And he says that there are colors and things I've seen in Jannah that I can't even describe. Colors which I can't even describe in this world. So there's things in Jannah, of course, naturally, that we've never seen before. And colors we've never experienced before. And of course, this is from the miracles and from the favors of Allah upon us in Jannah. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he reaches Sidratul Muntaha. And then he's told to continue. And that's when he goes and he speaks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A conversation between the Prophet ﷺ and Allah Azza wa Jal. What was said, we don't know exactly what was said. What we do know is what the Prophet ﷺ was given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was given the last two verses of Surah Al-Baqarah. The last two verses of Surah Al-Baqarah. Amana Rasulu bima unzila ilayhi min rabbihi wal mu'minun. Up until the end of Surah Al-Baqarah. And also he was given, of course, the salawat. 50 salahs in the day and the night. And this is the point where he met Allah and spoke to Allah. With regards to what exactly was said, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke to the Prophet ﷺ about, the Prophet ﷺ never mentioned it to anybody. He didn't say anything to anybody about the conversation. And naturally you could understand. This is a private conversation. Can you imagine the Prophet ﷺ speaking with Allah Azza wa Jal? You know, the dream of any Muslim. Ask Allah that we give the opportunity to be able to speak with Allah on the Day of Judgment. And so the Prophet ﷺ is speaking to Allah Azza wa Jal, and he doesn't tell us specifically what is said. It's something which the Prophet ﷺ keeps personally to himself. Whatever we are supposed to be told in terms of the salawat, in terms of the final two ayahs of Surah Baqarah, then of course we were told about this. Yeah.
Here the Prophet ﷺ received the revelation of what the Muslims believe. The Messenger family believes on what has been revealed to him from his Lord, and so did the believers.
So this is the last two ayahs of Surah Baqarah.
They all believe in Allah, His angels, His books and His messengers. They proclaim we make no distinction between any of his messengers, and they say we hear and obey, we seek your forgiveness, our Lord, and to you alone is our final return.
And narrations are mentioned about the virtues of these last two ayahs of Surah Baqarah. One narration mentions that the one who recites these two ayat, Allah will give him protection. So it's a source of protection for the one who recites these two verses.
Then he was taken into the light of the divine presence of Allah and was instructed that Muslims should pray 50 times a day.
So again, did he see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Narrations mention that the Prophet ﷺ, when he spoke to Allah, there was a veil of light. There was a veil between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but that veil was a veil of light. And he said that once he was asked by a companion, did you see Allah? And so he said, Nurun anna arahu. He said there was light, how could I see him? So there was light between, a veil of light between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also Aisha radiallahu anha was asked. And she says, whoever says that he saw the Prophet ﷺ is not speaking the truth. Whoever is saying that he saw Allah Azza wa Jal, this person isn't speaking the truth. So it seems like he didn't see Allah, and this is something which is going to be a reward for the believers on the Day of Judgment.
The Prophet ﷺ recalled, on my way back I passed by Musa, and what a good friend to you he was. He asked me how many times I've been ordained to perform.
So he says, I came back and I passed by Musa alayhi salam, and what a good friend to you he was. Why? Because he said, reduce the salawat. What a good friend he was to you guys. Because if it wasn't for Musa alayhi salam, we would pray 50 times every single day. And so Musa alayhi salam, when he is returning back from the heavens, Musa alayhi salam asks him, what has Allah given you? Now this is interesting because in order to go past Musa alayhi salam, he had to have gone past Ibrahim alayhi salam. But did Ibrahim alayhi salam say anything? Ibrahim alayhi salam never said anything, which is interesting. The scholars mention why. Why didn't he say anything? Some of the scholars they say the station of Ibrahim alayhi salam is such that he wouldn't question what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him. And of course, Ibrahim is Khalilullah. He's the friend of Allah. He's the one who would obey the commands of Allah. He was given those tests in his life of slaughtering his son, etc. And so he wouldn't ask. Also, they say Ibrahim alayhi salam was different as a prophet and messenger, and the trials he was given compared to the trials Musa alayhi salam was given. How so? Because Ibrahim alayhi salam didn't have many followers. Musa alayhi salam had a whole tribe, Bani Israel, who were following Musa alayhi salam. And so he had experience dealing with people and what will be difficult for the people. And so also it shows us Musa alayhi salam's inquisitive nature. Also he's Kalimullah. He's the one who spoke to Allah. And that's something else that we can say. Musa alayhi salam was the one who directly spoke to Allah. The Prophet ﷺ is also now somebody who's directly spoken to Allah also. So Musa alayhi salam now feels like he has a connection, more of a connection. And so he says, what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you? What did Allah Azza wa Jal say? Yeah.
When I told him 50, he said, prayer is a serious matter and your people are weak. So go back to your Lord and ask him to reduce the number for you.
So he said, go back to Allah because 50 prayers are too much for your people. Your people won't be able to bear 50 salawat. Go back and ask Allah for them to be reduced. And so the Prophet ﷺ goes back and it's reduced by 10. Yeah.
Go to you and your Lord and ask him to reduce the number of the prayers for you and your community. I did, and he took away 10. Again, I passed by Musa and he said the same again. And so went on until only 5 prayers for the whole day and the night were left. Musa again gave me the same advice. I replied that I had been back to my Lord and asked him to reduce the number until I was ashamed, and I would not do it again.
So he goes back numerous times until the salah is decreased all the way up to 5, all the way down to 5 salawat. And he comes back again, and Musa alayhi salam says to him, what has Allah said? What has Allah given you? And he says, he has given me 5 salawat. Musa alayhi salam says, go back, it's too much for your people. And the Prophet says to him, I'm ashamed to go back, I'll be back so many times, I don't want to go back anymore. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us 5 salawat. And this is first of all showing us the mercy of Allah. Imagine, for example, giving a task to somebody, and then he keeps asking for it to be reduced, and then you keep on reducing it, but there comes a moment when you think this is like, you're not doing what I've asked you. The mercy of Allah is such that it's unlimited. Allah's mercy is infinite. And so He reduces from 5 all the way down, from 50 all the way down to 5. 5 salawat. And also, scholars speak about why 50. Why did Allah begin with 50? Of course, Allah had decreed that this would be the case, that a person would be praying 5 times a day. It shows us that Allah wanted to give us the reward as if we prayed 50 salawat. And so when a person prays 5 salawat in the day and the night, Allah rewards him as if he prayed 50 salawat in the day and the night. Yeah.
He of you who performs the 5 prayers faithfully will have the reward of 50 prayers.
And interestingly, it's said, based on narrations of the Prophet's prayers, that the Prophet ﷺ, with his obligatory prayers, his rawatib prayers, his voluntary prayers, his prayers during the night, some of the scholars, they say and they calculate that he would actually pray how many units of prayer? 50 units of prayer every day. Salatul Duha, the rawatib prayers, the sunnah prayers, the nawafil prayers, the night prayers, all of them combined, he would actually pray 50 prayers every single day. SubhanAllah, that's amazing. Considering the obligation was 5, he will still pray 50, based on all the salawat combined. Yep.
On the morning following these events and the Prophet's return to Mecca, he told Quraysh what had happened.
And a narration mentions the Prophet ﷺ, he said, I was anxious to tell them about this journey. Why? Because of course, this journey is a journey which takes weeks. To get there and then to come back, you're talking like a month. And now he's going to tell the people, because he has to tell them what happened. This is a miracle from the miracles that Allah was given to the Prophet ﷺ. He has to now tell them about this journey, that he just went to Jerusalem. When did you go? Last night. When did you come back? Last night. So you can only imagine, people would have a field day with this. And he knows this is something which people won't believe. The disbelievers, Abu Jahl, etc., they're going to, say this is ridiculous. How is this possible? And so, as he's there by the Haram, by the Kaaba the next day, Abu Jahl passes by and he sees the way he's behaving. He's anxious, he's more concerned, nervous. So he tells him what's happened. And he says, I went to Al-Aqsa last night. And he says, Al-Aqsa, you went to Al-Aqsa last night and you're here with us. He says, yes. And so Abu Jahl, the Prophet says, Abu Jahl didn't know whether to stay and mock the Prophet ﷺ or to go and call other people to bring back to mock the Prophet ﷺ. So he said to the Prophet ﷺ, he said, if I bring more people, will you tell them the same thing? And he said, yes, because he's the truthful one. He's Sadiqul Ameen. So Abu Jahl went, brought people back and said, tell them what you just told me. And he told them, I went to Masjid Aqsa last night and I returned in the same night. And some of them laughed out loud. They hit their hands on their heads. They were, laughing and mocking the Prophet ﷺ. Yeah.
Most of them said, by God, this is ridiculous. A caravan takes a month to go to Syria and a month to return. Can you do that long journey in a single night?
So they're now quizzing him. How is this possible? What are you saying? It's like, when someone says something and no one believes them and they start having a field day. Or it's the latest thing he said. That's so funny. And they start mocking and making fun of the Prophet ﷺ. Some of them, they say, we've been to Masjid Aqsa. We've actually been there. You've never been there. They know the Prophet ﷺ. They know his past, his history. They say, if you've been to Masjid Aqsa, describe Masjid Aqsa to us. So he starts describing what he's seen. But first of all, he traveled during the night. Secondly, it wasn't like a tour of Masjid Aqsa, where he was traveling around the masjid and looking at everything and admiring the view, etc. He went inside, prayed and then left. So he's describing as best he can. But the questions start to get more and more detailed, more and more intense. This piece and that piece and this thing and that thing and this area and that area and this part of the building, etc. And he's unable to answer them. Then he said, alayhi salatu wasalam, Allah showed me an image, a window where I could see Masjid al-Aqsa clearly in front of me. And every time they would ask me a question about Masjid al-Aqsa, I was able to reply. I could see the masjid as if it was in front of me, like a TV or a screen. He could see the masjid in front of him. And he would start answering their questions. And they would keep asking him questions, he would keep on answering. And they would say, yeah, he's telling the truth. He's right, this is how it looks, this is the correct description, this is how it looks from this angle and from this perspective and from this side. He's actually telling us the correct answers. And so now even they're thinking, what's going on? How is he able to, answer these kinds of questions if he's never been? Yeah.
Even many Muslims were amazed by this and wanted the Prophet ﷺ to explain.
So you can imagine even, some of the Muslims would be thinking, this is, how would this have been possible? And of course, it's only natural for a person to, sometimes question, but of course, they all believed in the Prophet ﷺ.
Some run with the news to Abu Bakr, who said, "By Allah, if the Prophet ﷺ himself said it, then it is true."
So some went to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. They were like, oh, we can't wait till Abu Bakr with this. This is going to be, let's see what he has to say. So they go to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, they say to him, this is what your companion is saying. He said he went to Masjid al-Aqsa and came back in one single night. And it can't even be done today, by the way. You can't go to Aqsa and return back in the same night. It takes like 12, maybe 12 plus hours to go there and come back. It will take at least 12 hours. So they say to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, your companion is saying that he went to Masjid al-Aqsa and he came back last night. And so Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu says to them, and he asks them, is this what he's saying? Meaning, how do I know you're not lying? How do I know you're not making things up about the Prophet like you normally do? And they say, yes, this is exactly what he's saying. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he says, if that's what he's saying, then he's speaking the truth. Straight away without any hesitation. If he's saying what he's saying, if what you're saying, that he's saying this, then that's what he genuinely said, then he's spoken the truth. And they said, you believe he went to Masjid al-Aqsa last night and he returned as well, in the same night. That's what you're saying. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he says, I believe in something greater than this. I believe that Allah sends revelation from above the seven heavens to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What's more greater? For him to travel in this world in a short span of time, or for Allah to send revelation from above the seven heavens to our Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam in a matter of seconds. And so they don't say anything. And that's when he was given the laqab, the nickname Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, the one who believed wholeheartedly in the Prophet ﷺ and believed in what the Prophet ﷺ said and what he did.
Remember, the Prophet tells us that the word of Allah comes in directly from the heaven to earth at any hour by day or night, and we believe him. Is that greater miracle than what you are now doubting? Then Abu Bakr went to the mosque and listened to the Prophet's detailed description of Jerusalem. He commented, "You tell the truth, O Prophet of Allah." From then on, Abu Bakr was honored the title of Siddiq, which means he who gives his word to support the truth.
And also, interestingly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, he says about those whom Allah has blessed, فَأُولَٰئِكَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ أَنْعَمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ, then they are those whom Allah Azza wa Jal has blessed, who has favored, مِنَ النَّبِيِّينَ وَالصِّدِّقِينَ. And the Prophet is, of course, from the Nabiyyin. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq is from as-Siddiqin. That was his laqab, that was his nickname, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And the third category was shuhada. Umar radiallahu anhu, then Uthman radiallahu anhu, Ali radiallahu anhu, from the shuhada. And the salihin, the scholars say the salihin are those who are from the scholars who have knowledge and those who act upon that knowledge. Yeah.
Others also began to believe the Prophet's story when he went on to describe two caravans he had seen on his way back to Mecca. He told the doctors where he had seen the caravans, what they were carrying, and when they would arrive in Mecca. All that the Prophet ﷺ had said was born out of when the caravans arrived. All arrived at the time he said they were carrying all that he described.
One narration mentions that as he was returning back to Mecca from the journey, he saw a man who had lost his camel in the desert. And they say the camel is the ship of the desert. If you lose your camel in the desert, that's it. It's like you're going to die. And so he was panicking, he was trying to find his camel, and the Prophet ﷺ could see him from above looking for his camel. He could see the camel. And so he told the man where the camel was. And this caravan was returning or coming back or coming to Mecca. And so the caravan arrived, and he mentioned this incident to the Quraysh. They asked the people in the caravan, did anything strange or interesting happen on this journey? And they don't mention specifically the incident. One of the men, he says, yes, something strange happened. I lost my camel, and I heard a voice tell me where my camel was. And so all of these things were proof that this incident wasn't something which some people nowadays claim it was a dream. It didn't actually happen. He was imagining things. If it was a dream, then it wouldn't. The whole point of it would be there would be no benefit. There would be no point to this whole story. The whole point is that he went on this journey, as Allah says in the Quran.
Glory be to him who carries his servant by night from the holy mosque to the far distant place of worship, the neighborhood which we have blessed, that we might show him some of our signs. He is all hearing and the all seeing.
Yeah, and Allah Azza wa Jal calls this area الذي باركنا حوله. This area that we have blessed its surroundings. We have blessed the whole area. And of course, Al-Aqsa is one of the most blessed areas in the world. A prayer in Masjid Al-Aqsa is equivalent to 100 prayers anywhere else. And we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to protect the Muslims who are there in this difficult time. 100. Masjid Nabawi, 1,000. And Masjid Haram in Mecca, 100,000.
But the star, when it descends, your companion Muhammad has not strayed, nor has he erred, nor does he speak from his own inclination. It is not but a revelation revealed, taught to him by one intense in strength, one of soundness.
And this is Surah Najm. And this surah also speaks about the ascension, the Mi'raj into the heavens, when he speaks about Sidratul Muntaha and speaks about Allamahu Dhu Mirratin Fastawa, about the angel Jibreel alayhi salam.
Then he approached and descended, and was at a distance of 2 power lengths or nearer, and he revealed to his servant what he revealed.
Revealed to his servant what he revealed. What did he reveal to his servant? The 2 verses of Surah Baqarah, the last 2 verses. Yeah.
The heart did not lie about what it saw, so we dispute with him over what he saw, and he certainly saw in the descent at the low tree of utmost boundary.
عند سدرة المنتهى.
Near it is the garden of refuge, where there covered the low tree that which covered it. The sight of the Prophet did not swerve, nor did it transgress its limits. He certainly saw the greatest signs of his Lord.
لقد رأى من آيات ربه الكبرى. Allah says, verily he saw from the greatest signs of his Lord. So this journey was from the greatest ayat and from the greatest signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And of course, you can only imagine how the Prophet's heart must have been feeling, how he must have been after this journey, the boost and the encouragement that this must have given him to continue with the call of Tawheed to those who he was sent to. And of course, this is also a sign of the coming of relief to the Prophet ﷺ. As Allah says, فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. After hardship there is ease, after hardship there is ease, meaning there is always 2 hardships, there is always 2 eases after 1 hardship. And so, inshallah, we'll continue with the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ next week. Any questions before we conclude?
The Prophet ﷺ, you say he saw both paradise and hell, but the paradise is the heaven, so did he come down then to see the hell?
So the brother's asking, how did he see hellfire and where exactly is hellfire? So we don't know where exactly hellfire is. We know it's, of course, the world of the unseen. We know that paradise is up, above the heavens. With regards to how he saw hellfire, of course, Allah is able to do all things. And so Allah showed him whatever needed to be seen. How he went there, the location of hellfire, Allah knows best. It was an obligation upon the Muslims. And the Prophet